Good evening, right? How are things with you tonight, right? Excuse me. Well, we had a really interesting day today. There's no question about that. Right. Let me get myself together here. I hope everyone has made themselves very comfortable, that you got your snacks out there, you got your other refreshments, of which we won't discuss, and everything's ready at hand. Here's a synopsis of what's going on tonight. After these remarks from me, you're going to get an introduction by Gary Patonki, who's the chair of the EGC's Green Initiative, and he'll be presenting Drew Tower from Beyond Pesticides. And after that presentation, we'll have our question and answer period. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions. There's a lot of technical issues here. And of course, you may be interested in some of the techniques that we could apply ourselves to our own individual gardens. After the Q&A period, Paul Durbin, our Vice President of Programming, will be announcing what our program will be for next month. And then I'll finally close up the meeting with a few very short remarks afterwards. Now, there's a reminder here for those of you familiar with our virtual meetings, and also some suggestions to those who are here for the very first time. During this virtual meeting, please keep your audio on mute and turn your video cameras off. If you experience a short time lag between the speakers, that's not uncommon. It's just a glitch probably on our side. Don't adjust your stuff. We'll just be patient and we'll reconnect and we'll fix what the problems are on this side. If you're here on Zoom, if you do get disconnected by any chance, you can rejoin, just sign back in the way you did originally, and you'll come right back on, no problem. You may have a little hesitation if we don't notice that you're still waiting, but you'll get there, just be patient. And you can post questions through the chat button. That's located at the bottom of your screen if you're on your laptop. If you're on, I'm sorry, if you're on your screen on your regular computer, if you're on a laptop, it may be on the top. At any rate, I want you to know that if you do put a question or you go into the chat, you are talking with everybody. So keep your comments appropriate and be kind to people. That's a good thing to do in general. If you're coming in on Facebook Live, you can post your questions as a comment on the video. And we're asking anybody on Facebook to please share the video so that others can also join in. We have a couple of monitors that are going to assist the audience in the Q&A. Paul Durbin and Mario Rios will assist and collect questions submitted from the audience, and then they'll present them to the speaker at the end of his presentation. I'd like to remind everybody here that we're recording, and this is going to be archived in our and enjoy yourself there. It'll be on our website, and if you missed it, or if you want to review something or get some particular issue, or if you want to recommend it to friends or whatever, just tell them to go to thequalitygardenclub.com. That's our website, and I'm sure that they'll be learn how to enjoy themselves. At any rate, January 2021, that's certainly a historic date. We did not choose, we have our meetings regularly on the third Wednesday of every month. We did not mean to usurp your enjoyment of the inauguration. I'm sure that many of you have been there watching the presidential inauguration. And I think with all its fanfare and commentary, speaking for myself, I'd like to take a break from staring at a screen, so I'll keep these comments brief, all right? Today's our first meeting of the new year for the Quality Garden Club. And just to a reminder, we are going to be resuming our garden tour later this spring. It was very, very popular last year. We had over 80 people joining us at 5 of our different gardens. And we're also going to be bringing back the delightful exotic and rare plant auction. As yet, we have yet to establish a date for either event, but we do anticipate that they will be happening within the next few months after we figure out the logistics. So we have to make sure that they're safe and that everything is ready and rolling for everybody to enjoy themselves and feel secure. I'm pleased to announce that the personable and very energetic Rick Leitner has agreed to help organize both of these very popular events. You can keep abreast of all these things as this develops immediately by just checking with us on our website, equalitygardenclub.org. As gardeners in the semi-tropics, we face a constant battle with weeds and pernicious insects. And unfortunately, a number of us use commercial herbicides and pesticides. Tonight's topic is about returning to a much more natural control, especially in our public parks, and eschewing the chemical approach and concentrating on revitalizing nature's own system of balance. And I think this is going to be a really informative discussion here by Drew. You'll see me again just after the presentation for a few closing remarks and relief, and I'll let you go with that. Well, let's keep this brief. I'd like to introduce now the chair of our Green Initiative Committee, a hardworking and very dedicated person, Gary Patonki, who will introduce this evening's presenter. And I'll leave you at that particular point.
Hello, and I'd like to introduce Drew Toher, the Community Resource and Policy Director at Beyond Pesticides. Since 2016, he has held that position, and prior to that, he was the organization's Public Education Associate for 4 years. In his current position, he collaborates closely with community advocates and local and state officials to transform community pesticides policies in a way that ensures lasting protection of public health and the environment. Drew has a Master of Science degree in Environmental Management and a BA in Global Affairs. He's also an avid hiker, a gardener, and a hobby beekeeper, so he's going to fit in perfectly with us. He will be outlining the programs that the Green Initiative has been working on since November of 2019. The Green Initiative and the Equality Garden Club, Wilton Manors, and Oakland Park have committed to learning about how to bring public lands in each city to a completely organic state. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Drew. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary. As he mentioned, I am the Community Resource and Policy Director at Beyond Pesticides, and we are a national nonprofit organization that works with advocates, scientists, policymakers, and communities across the country to eliminate the use of toxic pesticides in favor of organic practices and least toxic products. I'd like to start by thanking you all at Equality Garden Club for your generous support in launching our organic land care program in Oakland Park and Wilton Manors, and of course to Mr. Gary Patonki in particular for his stalwart advocacy and engagement within his community. We are very excited to be running this program in South Florida, and I'm excited to be here with you all. I hope that my presentation will provide you all with a bit more background on the important changes that your support is enabling on the ground, and I'll provide an overview of our program, an update on the progress that we've made to date, and what we ultimately hope to achieve. And land care without toxic pesticides is possible throughout the country. I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to go dark because I'm working off one screen. Great. Hope you all can see that. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the program, I'd like to take a brief minute to discuss the basis for eliminating the use of toxic chemicals. I'm going to talk about the dangers they pose to human health and our environment, and how our state and federal regulators aren't necessarily ensuring safety in that regard. And we can start by taking a look at pesticides in general. If you look at the label of a pesticide, you'll notice that it lists both the active and inert ingredients in a pesticide product. The active ingredient is considered toxicologically active against the target pest. This is the chemical that EPA performs its toxicity tests on. However, looking at the label, you'll also notice the inert ingredients also comprise a significant portion of the pesticide formulation, and it can actually be as high as 99%. But this inert ingredient isn't required to be disclosed. It doesn't undergo the same toxicity tests as the active ingredient, and moreover, it's not tested in combination with the active ingredient in the pesticide product. And what we've seen from independent science is that these other inert ingredients can make a pesticide product more or less toxic. It depends upon the formulation. But in addition to mixtures and the synergistic impacts that occur between multiple chemicals together, there are other complexities that are not addressed in the pesticide registration process. Endocrine disruption. This is the ability for pesticides to cause impacts at infinitesimal doses by acting as hormones in our body. It is not evaluated despite a 1996 law requiring EPA review. Pesticides are often registered conditionally, and this means EPA will allow a pesticide to market without required studies on certain health endpoints because the agency assumes the chemical will not cause what are known as unacceptable adverse impacts. This is the standard EPA regulates to, while it waits for the data. And we've seen time and time again, many instances where the data EPA was waiting for ends up resulting in serious environmental problems. The agency also assumes that there will be 100% label compliance, despite evidence that many do not, unfortunately, read the label before applying a toxic pesticide. Children, the elderly, and other sensitive populations are often not provided additional necessary protections, and the agency often discounts restrictions that have occurred in other countries, as well as the viability of alternative products. So while EPA registers these pesticides, the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services simply rubber stamps what is ultimately a lackluster process. So what has the independent science told us? Well, it's told us that the most commonly used pesticides on lawns today, they're linked to cancer, birth defects, reproductive toxicity, kidney and liver damage in humans, groundwater contamination, toxicity to birds, bees, fish, and other aquatic life. For more details on the link between pesticides and human health, I'd invite you all to view our pesticide-induced diseases database, and you can find that at beyondpesticides.org/health. And there we catalog the independent literature linking pesticides to diseases that are simply all too common in today's world. Now, I could spend my entire presentation on the hazards of pesticides, but ultimately, to be successful and achieve land management expectations, we need to make sure that we have viable alternatives to the use of these toxic chemicals. We need to, and that is our primary focus for our organic land care pilot program that we're working on in Wilton Manors and Oakland Park. But before we get into those sites specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ecological rationale behind our approach, how it might differ from a more traditional chemical dependent program. And we're really talking about two different systems. The chemical approach is generally going to focus on treating symptoms. And by symptoms, I mean pests and weeds, as they are actually indicative of a problem, a source of a problem that lies in the soil. The natural approach, on the other hand, is going to focus on addressing the root causes of pest problems by enhancing soil health. Natural land management in a turfgrass system is going to emphasize pest prevention through cultural practices, and this includes things like aeration, which is going to bring oxygen to soil life, overseeding, which is in fact one of your best herbicides because it's going to help you crowd out weeds, mowing high because more biomass above ground is going to allow deeper roots below ground, and dethatching if the turf grows too thick. The use of any fertilizer should be guided by a soil test, and weed and pest management should be based upon need with the least toxic products available. On the other hand, the chemical approach is going to focus on using synthetic pesticides and fertilizers without necessarily considering need, often spraying by calendar date or the see and spray approach to pest management with limited use of cultural practices. But when we do focus on soil health, we see a number of benefits. Soil is a living system. You might remember from high school biology class, a teaspoon of soil contains millions, billions of microorganisms. Well, that is absolutely correct. But what we want to do is actually put them to work for us. And when we do that, we find that we increase nutrient and water holding capacity. We create stronger plants that are better able to withstand pest and weed pressure, and we reduce the need for outside inputs. And discussing a bit more about pests as symptoms, we can take a look at this chart. You can find this on our website, Read Your Weeds, and consider some examples when it comes to weeds. And this is, again, on a turf grass system. Dandelion and plantain, for instance, common weeds. And as we can see, they're often caused by compacted soil or soil with a low pH. You could spray those weeds, but unless you address the root causes of their growth, they are very likely to come back. So the natural approach instead is going to focus on increasing soil aeration or adjusting pH as indicated on a soil test. And eventually, it will address those two problems. So once cultural practices and soil health are dialed in, and much of the weed and pest pressure is going to be reduced. But even under the best conditions, we know that problems can still arise. So I'd like to talk a short bit about the natural approach to pest management. And in making a determination whether to control weeds and pests, we first want to make sure that we're monitoring, we're record keeping, and we're going to set action levels for acceptable pressure. A small number of weeds or pests might not necessarily require any immediate action if we are getting soil health in place. And if we do decide there's a need to manage weeds and pests, we should subsequently evaluate how effective our approach was and see if there are any preventative measures we can put in place to avoid the need for management in the future. So if you follow this process and you're at the point where management is necessary, after these action thresholds have been set, here are some options that you can take under a natural land care program. And mind you, I'm going to focus on weed management here just in order to be brief. The first is, of course, mechanical management. We're talking about weed whacking. We see this gentleman weed whacking along a fence line. There are also tools like the garden popper that prevent the need to bend over or pick up weeds. There are flame weeders as well. And of course, they can be quite fun, but of course, folks need to be careful with them. There are also steam weeders, and they are growing in popularity at the municipal level because they're quite useful on hardscaped areas like sidewalks, areas where we don't have a soil system to work with. Steam weeders can be really effective. Companies from Canada and Australia are starting to break into the US market, and in part, that's because of growing community concerns over the hazards of pesticides. There's also habitat manipulation, and that means reducing or increasing a share of sunlight or shade, eliminating waterlogged areas, and using things like weed covers or suppressants, such as mulch, weed mats, or black plastic. There are biological controls for pests and weeds. I like to highlight goats here. We're big fans of goats at Beyond Pesticides, but biocontrols can also include microscopic organisms and bacteria, such as the use of Bacillus thuringiensis, nematodes, or milky spore to control grubs. The picture here is actually a herd that an HOA rented in Orlando to clear invasives like grapevine, potato vine. For problematic invasive, goats are our go-to suggestion. And you can see from this picture, they're quite effective at eliminating vegetation. They likely did this work in around a week. And afterwards, it's simply a matter of clearing out what's left and replanting with native species. And of course, in more public areas, goats can be an excellent draw for the community. People, especially kids, love to come and watch them. And they can really help educate residents about natural land management. Lastly, there are least toxic pesticides, but ideally, even these are used as a last resort after you've implemented those sound cultural practices, you've gone through the natural pest management process, and you've exhausted the other methods I just discussed. So beyond pesticides, we define least toxic pesticides using two federal programs. That is the USDA Certified Organic Program and the EPA Minimum Risk Program. And what we get from these two programs are the least toxic yet still effective pesticide products on the market. For herbicides, some examples include vinegar. We're talking about 20% vinegar, not the vinegar in your cabinet. The vinegar in your cabinet might be around 5% acetic acid, but that's unlikely to do a good job at killing weeds, according to studies. There are also horticultural soaps and oils, insecticidal soaps and oils, and essential oils. There are And some best practices for applying these products, particularly these herbicides, include spraying a weed as soon as possible after the weed sprouts. These organic products work much better on young weeds. Coating the entire target plant. And generally, these products are going to work best in direct sunlight, but luckily for you all in sunny South Florida, that is usually not a problem. So now that we've established a baseline of why we need to eliminate these chemicals and discuss some methods how to do so, I'm going to start getting into some specific examples. And we can first take a look at this park in Colorado that was transitioned from chemical to organic land management through what was essentially a beta version of our training program. And I will get to at the later in this warm season grasses, but I just want to provide this because it's a neighborhood park. It was well documented, 3-year transition, and I get into some of the before pictures. We can see a lot of compaction and thatch. That thatch there, minimal turf density. We're looking at generally an unhealthy system with significant weed pressure. But here's the same turf after the transition, after 3 years of natural management. We see a thick turf, weeds are being replaced with grass, and we've got a healthy system that meets community expectations. So I'll go back to that. Now, of course, I understand that you all are dealing with a much different climate. And again, that was a highly documented site transition. But I also want to provide this picture here of Irvine, California. This is a warm season site that began its organic transition in 2016. And that is the above picture. And the below picture is actually just a little over 1 year later. And now I'm going to provide a brief rundown of how we get there. You know, the process that we follow in transitioning communities like Oakland Park and Wilton Manors. This is a project that we are conducting and coordinating with Mr. Chip Osborne of Osborne Organics. His picture is there. He's a board member of Beyond Pesticides. He sits on the board of his local Parks and Rec department, and he has over 2 decades of experience working on natural and organic land care throughout the United States. And this is the action plan that we use to initiate the program. Our next step is generally to take soil samples, but we're not just taking soil samples for texture and nutrient makeup. We're not just looking at the silt clay and the NPK. We're also conducting what's known as a biological assay or a bioassay. And this is going to evaluate the total and active bacteria, fungi, and protozoa present in a given soil. And this helps us understand what types of inputs and cultural practices may be needed for the transition. Next, we send out a questionnaire that goes over a number of questions about the site. Most important to us are site expectations, because our primary goal within this work is to craft a program that continues to meet or go beyond community expectations for a site's appearance. But we're also looking at current and past practices, pesticide and fertilizer use, staffing, resources, and other issues that could play a role into how the site is transitioned. Now, our process has changed a bit because of COVID and quarantines, but our next step in Wilton Manors and Oakland Park was to have a call with land care officials to go over these issues, discuss any other outstanding concerns. All of these data that I just mentioned, the soil samples, the questionnaire, they then get pulled together in order for us to deliver an organic land management plan. And that provides a transition calendar outlining recommended cultural practices and product inputs. We are now planning to hold another call with officials to provide an online training on soil biology and organic land care practices, walk through these reports, and discuss any concerns or impediments to the program. Beyond Pesticides and Mr. Osborne, we then remain on call to discuss any issues that may arise, such as inclement weather, increased foot traffic, budget, or staff changes, et cetera. We know how it can be at the local government level. And so, given that we have some data, I can get a bit into the weeds here, and the pun is intended, unfortunately, on what we've found. I'm going to try not to go too deep, though, and provide some general findings, not specific to any one site, although I will note that there is some variability between them. And so one thing to note is that the sites we're working with are Bermuda grass. That is a high-end warm season grass that can work very well on heavily trafficked sites. While cutting high is usually something we recommend, with warm season Bermuda, we're going to be cutting it short, generally 3/4 to no more than 1.5 inches. Bermuda can be cut short, but it needs relatively high levels of nitrogen in order to keep it going, compared to other grasses and compared to even other warm season grasses. So with Bermuda, it spreads through rhizomes. It spreads both by growing up through stolons and horizontally through rhizomes. And what we want to do is encourage that horizontal growth in order to crowd out weeds. And the way we're going to get there is through natural nitrogen fertilizer. We're going to pump that up just a little bit and help increase that horizontal coverage and crowd out weeds. The medium in which the sites are growing also has very high percentages of sand. We're talking about usually over 90%, but it does have good levels of microbes. And when we talk about microbes, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about total and active, essentially how many there are, and then how many are actually awake and performing their function. For bacteria, we're generally finding high total and high active. For fungal microbes, we generally have good total levels, but the proportion of active fungal life is low. Levels of protozoa, which play an important role in consuming and cycling soil life, they're also low. And we want to wake up these microbes, because when they do, they're going to start cycling their own nutrients, which is eventually going to help supplement fertilizer applications. So we're going to be looking to increase the frequency of certain cultural practices and product inputs. And that includes a suggestion to increase aeration, a switch to naturally based fertilizers that will be made plant available by bacteria, and the use of the soil amendment humic acid, which is essentially denser distilled organic matter, to help further activate the soil microbial population. And while these practices will require a bit more staff time, both time and money will subsequently be saved by eliminating the need for toxic pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. Because as I mentioned earlier, healthy soil will create more resistant plants that are more resilient to weed and pest pressure. And we can't forget, the staff in these communities will not have to put themselves in harm's way by exposing themselves to potential pesticide-induced diseases. And indeed, ultimately, there are a wide range of benefits to using the natural or organic approach for soil quality, biodiversity, to minimize energy use and pollution, and to protect workers. And importantly, total costs are roughly the same between the chemical and organic approach once we have this system in place. And this is a great chart published by researchers at Washington State University. The scale, you'll have to take a look at the paper in order to get that. So our program aims to provide communities with the technical information and the tools necessary to eventually transition all community sites to organic. But we do need the help of folks on this call to watchdog the process. Let us know what's happening on the ground, because we found that having a base of engaged community members is the best way to ensure that we implement this program successfully. Communities throughout the country and in Florida have already started to move in this direction. However, I'll note on this map, apart from South Miami, we're looking at Florida, which has done a good job with their ordinance, most of the local Florida policies on our map have only eliminated one chemical, and that's glyphosate. And I hope that after this presentation, you all understand that this is a systems approach to management. Removing one chemical from a chemical management program, it's not going to make it a natural program. More than likely, it'll be replaced by a different toxic pesticide, and we call that a regrettable substitution. What is needed is a change in thinking and approach. And with this work, and because of the support of the Equality Garden Club, we're hopeful that Wilton Manors in Oakland Park will be next. And again, thank you to Gary and all the fantastic people here at Equality Garden Club for your generous support of this important effort. And I would be happy to take any questions you might have. I'll get my video back up.
Okay, the first question is this process more expensive than the chemical process?
That is a great question. So if you asked me that 10 years ago, we would say, well, at the start, the organic process is going to be a little bit more expensive in terms of startup costs, but eventually you'll see over the course of time that it's going to actually be cheaper to use the organic approach, because you're not going to be needing to spend money on those chemicals, on those synthetic fertilizers. You're going to start to generate nitrogen fertilizer through the soil life, and you're going to have much less need for product input. That I would have said that 10 years ago. Today, what we found is, the organic products that are out there, the practices that are out there, the technology that's been developed over the last decade and a half. What we're looking at with most communities, we can hit expectations from the start within current budget levels. But it all does depend upon expectations. So if we get a site that is, completely torn up, there's barely any grass there, it's going to be very difficult to move that to an organic program and have it look good. What our goal is to meet or exceed current levels of community expectations for a particular site. And we found that we can usually do that within the current budget levels within a community.
Okay, next question is, where can we find more information about your processes?
Our website is a great place to find that. We have a very extensive website with a lot of information. It's very information dense. I would take some time to explore our website. I would point you specifically towards our lawn and landscapes page to find more out about that. And feel free to reach out to us at Beyond Pesticides. We take calls from the public. So if you ever have a pest problem or anything like that, we answer the phone.
Okay, next question is, where can you get your soil tested?
That is a great question. And a really important one, because a soil test really is the framework for how you're going to approach how you're going to manage your land, how you're going to manage your plants. It's very important. So most university extensions are going to have the ability for you to send a soil test. I think it's University of Florida down there where you all are. You can reach out to them and they'll give you a basic soil test. Some of the more complicated soil tests, more extensive and detailed tests, you can look to private labs. One that we use generally is A&L labs, and they might be called Waypoint Analytical, depending on where you are in the country. But they're a good place to test soil. Now, that is just the sand, silt, clay, NPK. As far as if you want to do a bioassay, that is a little bit more expensive. It's worth noting. It's a little bit more expensive. It's not 100% necessary if you just are, managing your own backyard turf. We do this as part of our program. But again, for an average homeowner, it's not 100% necessary, but it could be a really interesting project for you to take on if you'd like. And we use Soil Food Web New York. There's a website there, and there's another, obviously there in New York, and there's another on the West Coast. I believe they're called Earth Fort. And that's run by, I believe that's associated with Dr. Elaine Ingram.
Okay, the next question is, will the size of your property determine on how long the project will take?
Yes, I think so. That is definitely something that we want to know. How large is this piece of land? If there's a lot of, with a larger property, the only reason I would say that is because there might be multiple different soil types on a particular property, or different particular areas that might be problematic that might take a little bit more work or attention. That would be the only impediment. Generally, once you follow this process, it can be applied anywhere throughout the country.
Okay. The next question is humic acid available in retail stores?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. You can. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon. Actually, I think I have gotten it on Amazon.
Okay. Do you know about like Home Depot or Lowe's?
You might have to ask Home Depot or Lowe's. They may have it. They're more and more. moving towards stocking more organic, natural products in their stores. And much of that is because of consumer pressure against these retailers for stocking some of these toxic products like glyphosate and the neonicotinoids, which are toxic to bees.
Okay. The next question is, why are we not increasing our use of vermiculite as one of our fertilizer possibilities?
That's interesting. I'd like to have a conversation with about that. You know, I think one of our recommendations is actually going to be to increase the use of compost because what we want to do is add organic matter. That's really what we're focused on when it comes to developing and enhancing that soil life. The key is to be adding organic matter, adding compost to that turf, because that is going to really it's going to feed, it's going to supply microbes and the microbial population, and it's also going to feed the existing microbes and wake up the existing microbes that are there. As far as vermiculite, I kind of see that as a maybe like sand, but I'd like to have a conversation. And oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
About that.
What other types of organic fertilizer are on the market?
That is an excellent question. And Beyond Pesticides maintains a list. We maintain a list of both organic compatible fertilizers as well as organic compatible pesticide products. And I don't know if it's helpful. I could drop those in the chat, or I could send you all a, like a resource sheet, some later this week. It's up to you, but we definitely have that on our website, Lawns and Landscapes, tools for change. And underneath that drop down, you'll find organic compatible fertilizers, a list of that, and an organic compatible pesticide products, least toxic pesticide products.
Okay. The next question is, do you utilize any nitrogen fixing plants or ground covers like the sunshine mimosa, for instance, in place of any chemicals?
That is an excellent question as well. We have not done that as that particular, I'm not actually familiar with that particular plant. I'm sure there's a lot I'm not familiar with in terms of the climate down there in South Florida. But I will say, as far as nitrogen fixers, our big go-to for that would be clover. I haven't spoken with Chip about clover in any of the turf in South Florida. I'm not too sure about integrating that, but we have a general recommendation for folks to ease up on clover and accept clover. I've published a piece in the past taking a stand on clover because clover is actually an amazing benefit for a lawn. It will help you supply nitrogen for your turf. By that action, those root nodules, which will accept and fix nitrogen, into the soil. And it's a fantastic plant that's been much aligned as a result of the chemical industry post World War II, because it was a broadleaf weed that would die in the shipment of weed and feed, unfortunately.
Okay, the next question is there's several questions all related. In the Southern California project, what were the specific inputs? What natural nitrogen amendments? Was additional seed introduced? Is the use of some form of compost tea a cost-effective strategy in these municipal projects?
Okay, there's a lot of questions, and that individual, please send me an email. I'm sure somebody can provide my email address so you can get it on our website. Send me an email and I can get to you with a lot of the the details in there. We generally don't make our action plans public, but I can share some things on an individual basis with folks. I will say compost tea, we have had a lot of success with compost tea, and it's been an excellent way to get liquid form of fertilizer, liquid form of amendment into the soil, and activate that soil microbial life. We've had a lot of success with the main impediment to compost tea is making sure that the community has a compost tea brewer and that they know how to brew the compost tea correctly, because that can be it can be done wrong.
Okay. The next question is, why are we not increasing our use of vermiculture as one of our fertilizer possibilities?
I love that idea. I'm not. We have been thinking about biochar with this project, but I haven't spoken with Chip about vermicompost. But certainly, that is an excellent source of nutrients, an excellent source of microbial activity that you can use in a turf grass system. You can absolutely use in a turf grass system, and it's great for your garden as well, as I'm sure most, many of the folks on this call know.
Next question is, does Beyond Pesticides only focus on lawn turfs, or do you also help with information about how to treat gardens and or individual plants?
Yes, we well, anything pesticide related, you can speak to Beyond Pesticides about. We do have a program on our website. It's called Manage Safe. It'll help folks with your basic indoor and outdoor pests, including garden pests. We do have some resources that are more tuned towards growing an organic garden. We will definitely provide information on that. But we are absolutely fine if folks do not want to have a turf grass yard or backyard or lawn or front yard and move that more towards a native plant landscape. That is perfectly fine in our view.
Okay, that's all the questions. I just want to remind everybody that the website is beyondpesticides.org.
Those are great questions.
Good, glad you like them. So now I will be talking about next week's program, or next month's program. We're going to have Dr. Chad Husby, who's the Chief Explorer at Fairchild Tropical Gardens. His main focus is on finding, cultivating, and propagating new plants to enhance horticulture and botanical collection. He goes all over the world to do this, but he's centered from out of Fairchild Tropical Gardens, which I'm sure everybody around here has been to. And his topic is going to be on ficus and collusus. There's over 800 species of ficus. Some are very beneficial and some are very beautiful. Some produce fruit. And there's also 300 to 400 species of collusa, which some of which have the most striking flowers and should be given greater consideration in tropical gardens. And Chad's talked to us before, and he's a very interesting guy, and I think you guys will like him. And I want to thank, and if Drew, if you're still there, I want to thank you for coming to tonight. Van, I'm turning it back over to you now.
Hello again. We're back. Thank you, Drew. That was great. Very, very informative. A lot of details in there. I was concentrating on the turf. I understand, of course, that's the nature of the business here with the cities of Oakland Park and Wilton Manors. Well, I encourage people to contact us and find out a little bit more where we can get information that we might apply some of these techniques and this understanding to our individual gardens. But one step at a time. We've got lots of things. This is just the beginning of this whole process, and we're going to hear more about this over the course of time. And I want to thank Drew very much for that very well done demonstration. I hope that you've acquired, the people who've been listening in, a greater understanding of how we can restore our own gardens' natural defenses. And let's hope that we can reduce the use of our own use of chemicals. That would be a great big help to the general environment anyway, because there's a lot of acreage that is not public. It's not, actually, most of it is us. So we should be working with that in mind. All right. I want to make sure that you, along with our gardens and our plants, that you all stay safe and healthy. And I hope that you've enjoyed this. And we'll keep this very brief. It's a short meeting and short is sweet. I think I'll adjourn the meeting now so we can all go back to our other things in our lives. Nice. Thank you very much for attending and spending some time with us. Good night.